Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you all for joining in again for another session of Tales from the Pantheon. Today we have Kwame Boler, one of my amazingly good friends. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about what Tales from the Pantheon is. So essentially, we started this series to be able to really give tangible information, no BS, no fillers for entrepreneurs, community builders, and pretty much just ecosystem leaders in general to be able to give them tangible insights into different sectors, spaces, and some really big news for us. Actually, we have done a rebrand for our company, founding Titans, and we are now Titan AI. And so, essentially, what Titan AI is basically being able to help professionals, communities, and organizations to 10x their network and their engagement. And so we're doing that by having a platform that helps with entrepreneurs being, or with, see, I see, there I go with the entrepreneur thing. But what is it called? Being able to help with basically finding the right people, businesses, communities, events, and resources. And I want to bring on my co founder, Brandy, here so that she can say hi.
Hey there, y'all. Thanks for being here. Definitely check us out on Titan AI, and you'll see all the things that we have going on. You'll see our community challenge that we just launched. You'll be able to go into and see the different features that we're working through. There's a lot going on. We've got an entire calendar of a variety of events for the rest of the year, very similar to highlighting Kwame for the Tales from the Pantheon, global demos, and things like that. So definitely follow along, and we are excited to have y'all.
Yeah, and Brandy's going to be operating in the background, monitoring the chat and everything. So definitely feel free to engage with her. If you guys have any questions, if they're really awesome, we might just pop them up on screen and have Kwame answer some of those. But she's going to go off screen and handle all that stuff, and then we'll bring her back towards the tail end of everything. But that segues into the next portion of this. So I want to bring on an amazing entrepreneur, friend, mentor, and this really amazing individual. So let me bring on Kwame Boler.
Hello, everyone. Happy to have you all in the chat, and thank you for the intro, Gabe. Can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, and so I mean, we've known each other for probably what, almost 4 years now. If that, yeah, it's been a very good amount of time. But I know you very well. I'd love for everybody else that's listening in to get to know you as well. So give us a little bit about your background.
So hello, everyone. Kwame Boler. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Spritz. Shameless plug for Spritz. It's a vertical SaaS platform that's catered towards the home service economy. That sounds more convoluted than it actually is. Like, we're a back office business in a box for home service professionals. So think house cleaners, painters, lawn service professionals, etc. The problem that we solve is we make it super simple for them to manage their business so that they can focus effectively on doing the jobs instead of actually managing the business itself. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've operated and built 7 different companies to date with a variety of different spaces and backgrounds. From like, I have a penchant for marketplaces. And so I have, like, to date, I think I've like operated or dabbled in 3 or 4 different marketplace businesses. Definitely as more socially conscious entrepreneur, what that means to me is that I cannot build businesses that I don't think will actually be beneficial both to society as much as it is to my wallet. So a socially conscious capitalist as well. And I've been a lead mentor and advisor with a variety of different companies. I've worked with over 100 different companies to date through different programs, from Techstars to Black Ambition, 500, but 500 more unofficially than officially, and a couple of other like local college programs as well.
No, that's fantastic. And I know you have a lot of amazing advice that you've given me over the years. And so we'll, dive more into that as well. But I really want to know a little bit more detail on, how you even got started with being an entrepreneur, right? So take us back to your earliest venture, right? What's really sparked that journey into entrepreneurship, and how has your why kind of evolved over time as well?
It's actually kind of an interesting story, and it's pretty funny. It's one that I've answered quite a few times, but my entry into entrepreneurship was really surprising. I started with a simple problem. When I was in high school, my parents got me my first computer. It was one of the titanium model MacBooks, and I was probably like not more than 13, 14 years old. And geeky as it sounds, I was in debate camp in Vermont and horsing around with a couple of the other kids, and I broke my machine. And for any person that has a computer or has access to internet uninhibited and then loses access to internet, it was really destabilizing. And I tried to convince or coerce my parents into actually fixing it. And none of them were like willing to pay the thousands of dollars out of pocket for repair. So that was frustrating, but this was also the age of YouTube, also the age of like there weren't like standardized platforms available like iFixit, but there were similar tutorials that existed that included teardowns of my computer model. eBay was really popular, and I was able to recognize that I could access and purchase parts to repair my machine, and then eventually that I could do those things myself. But I lacked the capital to be able to pay for said repairs and the tools to do so. And so I went back to my parents and they shot me down again. And then I noticed in my school, there were a lot of students selling candy, like primarily chocolate, for causes. And I ended up like then realizing like I could buy those same boxes of candy from like a local warehouse, like a Costco, a BJ's, something like that, and end up making a ton of money quickly by selling them, selling like them by the bar, $1 a bar. And it ended up turning into its own enterprise very quickly. Like I only bought candy that I didn't actually eat or consume. I started figuring out different teachers, different preferences, and going on a certain route. Um, my rate of return was usually going through 2 to 3 boxes, in some cases a week. So I was able to make enough money simply to make a repair on my computer in less than a month's time, continued doing that on top of money I had saved from my allowances. And it's just like, it's such an interesting like segue in what defined entrepreneurship for me at the earliest point, because it was just problem solving. I was in a position where I wanted to get access back to my machine, and I ended up using that as an opportunity to be able to get the money that I needed to then solve my problem. And then it turned into a business as a result of it. Like I ended up continuing to sell it. There were even boxes of candy that I would sell wholesale to other kids that couldn't purchase it and then wanted to kind of corner on some demand. And then I ended up picking up a trade to where I learned how to do computer repair and would buy used computers or do repairs for other kids on campus. Or I would even sometimes source other things on like eBay, all while I was like maybe at 15 at this point, 16, to just buy, repair, and then resell just to get other forms of income as well.
No, that's honestly an amazing story. And like, I love the conversations like these because we don't really have these kind of casual, just like, hey, this is how I started out combos between you and I mean, I struggled with selling candy back in the day. I don't know if you remember when they used to have like, paying for band for us, right? Like, hey, you have to go door to door and, do everything. And like, it wasn't what my sisters had where, they could go all the way, and they just had to get back home before the lights turned on. My mom was like, you got to the end of the street light. And so if you can only sell that far, there's not a lot of transactions that can be made. So it's definitely a skill that a lot of people don't necessarily have inherently. I can say that I am great at outside sales now, but was not that great back then. So really good that you had that starting out. And with that, what are some of the lessons and like some of the toughest moments that you've had alongside your journey as an entrepreneur? Because you've also started several ventures as well. So, how do you push through those?
One of the biggest learnings that I had to inherit in being a founder is that life happens in parallel. Most people don't realize that when you're building a company, you still have to be responsible for maintaining both social and familial interactions. I first built my very first ventures. I entered with this mentality of short-term sacrifice for long-term gains. And I was running a marathon at a sprint's pace. And the thought process was that I would actually get to the destination faster by cranking more hours and being able to compound learnings quicker. In reality, what I ultimately discovered in hindsight was that certain aspects of building a company, time is a necessary ingredient and a function, as is rest, because you can tire yourself out and tire your team out if you don't really pace yourself appropriately. In addition to the fact that if you are still in your discovery phase, you can make a very easy mistake and run in the wrong direction faster just because you're aiming to get to what you suspect to be the final destination as a whole. So those are just some quick lessons learned in terms of one of the biggest, probably most traumatic experience I've ever had as a founder was a shutdown of a company prematurely. Um, One of the businesses that we had built was prior to pivoting into the current direction that we're in, was a marketplace that connected homeowners with house cleaners within the vacation rental space. And it would think of it as like an Uber for Airbnb cleaning. And one of the most difficult challenges we ever faced was a investor who committed fraud and operated as a bad actor, to where he led the round, signed a stock purchase agreement to finance the round, but failed to be able to deliver funds and wire funds. And the blowback from that and cratered not only the round, but ultimately destroyed all the momentum and direction of the company. It taught me quite a bit in terms of one, figuring out better ways in which you could best reassess or assess investors and do better diligence on investors prior to building rapport, getting in bed with investors, so to speak. I don't like the analogy, but bear with me. Um, in addition to the fact that I also had to realize another challenge that came with it was like there's power that comes in the positions that you hold as an executive. There were certain instances, especially as we started scaling some of the companies and getting the double digit employees, that I started noticing like a halo effect in terms of my interactions with team members and core team members. Like they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as some like I wouldn't say omniscient person or like a higher being, but I was placed on a pedestal because of the title. And I had to kind of grapple with that. I think it's mainly because my humility and principles just always want to be seen and treated as a person and treated no differently, but also recognizing that the power dynamic is not level. It's like if that person could say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, as an authority figure, I would have the complete ability to 180 their entire financial position or life. And that was also a hard thing to kind of come to terms and appreciate the gravity of. But yeah, like those are definitely some of the ones that come top of mind.
No, I mean you've told me even some of those stories with what happened with that previous investor and everything else. I mean, as I was even looking at our fundraising process, but also even drawing back to getting the proper rest, because I remember this vividly, surprisingly, because I was very sleep deprived. But even during the Venture Fest last year, where I told you, I was like, yeah, no, I'm working about like 20 hours a day right now, just cranking stuff out and getting everything done. You're like, don't do that. Stop.
Mhm.
Like, please. Because I was literally getting like 4 hours of sleep per day. And then I was like still going and doing a lot of networking events. Like that was when I was doing like 2 events per day,
Mhm.
if not more. And on top of like coding and doing other things. And I mean, you were 100% right. Like you can't get the quality of work out. You get volume, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. Like it's quality versus quantity type of scenario. And then honestly, even then the diminished returns start to kick in to where you're not necessarily even getting the the quantity either, right?
Mhm.
So I definitely appreciate you for actually, taking the time to kind of give that feedback to me as well, because I mean, it's something that is obvious, but also not obvious, right? It's something that's easily missed for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially at different stages. I know people that have fallen into that trap, whether they're 20 years in versus, this is their first endeavor. Um,
I was just gonna add to that. I think unfortunately the culture doesn't reward that behavior, nor is it well encouraged. It's like we're now getting to a point where different entities are starting to do more founder wellness, whether it be founder retreats or introducing more conscious, like wellness components or even metrics within organizations to be more thoughtful of reducing the likelihood of burnout. Um, and it's imperative. Like a really big lesson for me that I would want to impart on others is that you have to learn how to be kind to yourself. Like most founders are extremely hyper competitive by nature. It's like you don't usually enter this type of industry without the expectation or the desire to want to win above all. But if you're not giving yourself the rest that you need to recover appropriately, like a trained athlete or even any other professional, you'll burn yourself out or worse, potentially damage yourself to the point to where it could be career ending. And psychologically, you also in being kind and more pragmatic, both with your expectations and but also with your outcomes. I think it's just as equally imperative that you figure out ways to disjoint yourself from the entity. Many founders end up developing this uniform identity with their own company's brand. And that's especially true with to the CEOs of organizations, to where they sometimes see themselves as synonymous with the brand. And that is also a very unhealthy discourse to have. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, where life happens in parallel. You're going to potentially face different life events, life challenges, health events, health crises, family. My co-founder Claudius, at one point, he lost his father to cancer, and I think one of the memories that was most vivid with me, it was like while his father was on in hospice, he was at his bedside writing code because he felt the weight of his inability to contribute so much that he couldn't fully appreciate or be present in the moment while his father was last on this earth. And that is, even for me as a leader, as I sit back and ingest that, I realize that I was part of the problem there because I was so reliant and created a ecosystem that demanded that level of concentration that it was unfair to all of us involved. And it was unrealistic in terms of how we could achieve success.
I mean, honestly, I've experienced, similar aspects as well as I've continued to continue to build Titan AI, right? We've had a lot of, you know, things that have gone through, even with my own co-founder, or previous co-founder having issues, Ross, and, having to take a step back from the business and, a lot of transitions and things like that with just pivots, and all in the background, dealing with the things like, sick family members or, different people, coming in and out of our lives in different ways. And I'll leave it at that
Yeah.
for, cause it's a difficult process to balance life and entrepreneurship and also balancing a lot of those expectations because I mean, there's not really a playbook on that portion of everything. I mean, there are frameworks and there are a lot of different things, but everybody's journey is drastically different when it comes to looking at, how we're navigating these systems and especially with a lot of the industry shifts that are happening as well, or even cultural shifts. So I 100% agree with, everything that you've said on that point. And that kind of brings me into my next question about impact driven entrepreneurship because you just like myself or somebody that I see as an intersection on technology, but also social equity. And so, how do you define impact-driven entrepreneurship, and how do you balance making an impact, but also making sure that you're not, putting a burden on yourself or your team?
Well, how do I define impact-driven entrepreneurship? I'll start there. Um, I think it's important to where you first understand that what is an entrepreneur? Like an entrepreneur to me is an alchemist. It's a person who's responsible for leveraging whatever knowledge, resources, science background that they uniquely have to make what most would consider impractical or impossible a reality. To put it simply, they have this innate ability to turn nickels into quarters or quarter nickels into dollars. And an impact driven entrepreneur is someone who does or appreciates and operates with that same attitude and drive, but the only uniqueness to it or differentiator is that in addition to having that responsibility to turn nickels into quarters or dollars, they also discover ways in which they could be a benefit to the public or general population, or in many ways, if not just the general population itself, potentially to the customer segment in which they're supporting and building for. That's how I've always saw it. That's how I've always defined it. Um, and I think it's imperative, at least for me personally, I could not operate in a business per se or use and utilize my brilliance or resources and capabilities to work on something that I felt would be morally corrupt or morally ambiguous. Ambiguous in the sense to where, like, corrupt being like, yeah, I know that the product that I'm building does bad things and is inherently not good for the people who consume it. And I think like when people think of that, it's like more extreme situations when you may think of like cigarettes or alcohol or something along those lines to where they could be like addictive. But even still, I think in some instances, some will rationalize that there can be joy manifested through those interactions with the product itself, in addition to the fact that some of the profits utilized can be used for social benefit. Like I personally, in recognizing and hearing that, don't disagree, but I would prefer to operate in a space that could be of benefit all around. And I don't think that to be an entrepreneur or to be a capitalist is inherently evil, nor do I think that it's like some form of chaotic good. I do think that, or somewhere in between those two spectrums, I think that you could potentially, if you're well intentioned enough and capable enough with resources, find that place in that space to where you can make something that influences change. Maybe I'm a romantic, maybe I'm romanticizing too much, but I see that, there's a social responsibility that exists with people that have this innate ability to produce and create, and to not direct their talent towards making the world a better place.
No, I definitely, uh, agree with all of those sentiments all around, and perfectly said as always. But there's another. I want to kind of shift focus a little bit to more about you know your public speaking, and like some of the impact that you've had on media, right? So I know you've been featured as a speaker for global conferences. You personally spoke at South by Southwest this year, and I actually sat in on that panel. It was honestly amazing, showcasing a lot of the different data that you guys did for underrepresented founders. But also, you've been featured in outlets like Forbes, CNN, business journals. And so, what do you enjoy about showcasing your story on print and on stage, and kind of how has public speaking even impacted or shifted the impact for you as an entrepreneur?
I think public speaking in general can be a lever or at least a vehicle to introduce your ideas to those that may not naturally get access to them. And so it could be conductive, it could be a conduit that enables you, your brand, or the ideas that you represent to resonate with wider audiences to then be able to get access to more support or more resources as a result of it. And so there's like clear, like direct personal branding benefit that comes with each press release and each publication as being seen as an authority figures within the spaces that I intend to represent. Part of it is for me, it's like a change agent. I want it to be the change or a part of the change, a cog in the change that I wish I could have seen in my career overall. Like from you mentioned the South by Southwest panel to give more context and filler. I spoke with Lance Mason and a couple of other really incredible panelists on whether or not there were capital efficiencies that existed or capital inefficiencies that existed within different underrepresented groups and why. That's a really fair way to say is like if you were to break down the dollar representation of or the flow of dollars and who receives them, is it directly correlative and equal based off of the number representation of demographic within those groups. And it was actually really interesting. There was a lot of learnings that we unpacked in terms of deficits that we were able to identify with certain groups, as well as really interesting trends that kind of came from that. And so I'm happy that you found it really useful. But what was the impetus for it altogether was that we happened to notice that there was this unfortunate misrepresentation that existed within the media regarding the access of capital to underrepresented founders. And quite poignantly, in a panel that I was in the year prior around Black History Month, um, there was someone in the crowd that had asked us to where we had talked about the death of affirmative action that came as of late because of the Supreme Court vote. And in addition to the alliance and being able to become more prominent in suppressing that, um, the one person articulated that quotas were a way to promote fairness and build equity. And the question that we were asked was, well, if that's the case, then, you know, we all are hearing that 2% of capital goes to insert underrepresented demographic here. What should that number be? And none of us had an intelligent answer to that question. And then as we continued to kind of look online, we saw that the same literature was being circulated, which was that, you know, less than 2% of capital goes towards this demographic, less than 2% of capital goes towards this. But there wasn't anything that was being instructive or creating some form of goal and saying, well, this is actually what that number should be. And this is where there is a deficit. And this is why there is a deficit. And we thought that from a journalistic perspective, there was a clear opportunity that was being missed in real time because no one was taking the extra step to actually do any form of investigative journalism to assess that and be able to identify some trends. Yeah, like one thing that we looked at the McKinsey reports. One thing that was also interesting was even Doxon had reported that like Black founders or Black male founders were raising more capital at the pre-seed level than white male founders. And but their speed to doing so was exponentially longer, or not exponentially, but considerably longer by comparison. And even still, like founding teams that were mixed in terms of ethnicity and gender were raising the most amount of money and still not in the least amount of time. White males were able to successfully raise financing for their pre-seed round in the shortest interval of time by comparison. And that was really something to really unpack. But what was difficult to accept was that no one was reporting that message in any way that was digestible. And we also really appreciated what Peter from Carta was doing and kind of not desensitizing, but demystifying a lot of the coded data that was inherent within that platform and making it available and accessible and kind of benchmarking both the founders and to investors alike of what current market trends were in different industries. And we wanted to be a similar voice, or at least a step in the right direction of being able to make that message better found and be able to really understand without a lens of blame or anger what changes need to be done, if any, to correct some of the challenges that we're facing in the status quo.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. I actually didn't know that was one of the catalysts or the sparks for you guys diving deeper into that data, because I was actually there that because I was that the same panel when you guys were talking about like fearless fun, and I think Brandon was on that as well.
Yep.
Or,
Yep.
yeah, so I was there in the room for that one as well.
Yeah.
And I remember the exact question that you were kind of addressing as well, because it was one of those that even stood out to me as we were developing, previously founding Titans before, and how, because our initial ICP was with helping, just the startup ecosystem, specifically startup founders that were pre-seed to Series A. And I even noticed a lot of those those same trends as well. But there wasn't really, a real benchmark for, or a real endpoint to, okay, if we've reached this, we have succeeded in getting these numbers to the appropriate points. And even with my own research, it was just kind of staggering how limited the information was, and also how skewed or honestly unrelated to the topic that the data was. It's something that I'm very bullish on, obviously. For I want to see more, selfishly, more people that are underrepresented get funded, because I operate with the mantra of turning founders into funders, right? Turning more people that are from other backgrounds into people that can then fund the next waves of innovation or whatever it is. And that's why I always appreciate the level of data that you guys were able to present, especially during the panel for South by, even some of the other discussions that we've had, because I've obviously had you as a panelist on for some of the FI events and stuff as well. And we've kind of dove into some of these other data points on top of it. So it's always, good to reflect on some of those things. But going into, financial inclusion, I know that, you're passionate about really leveraging technology for financial inclusion. And I really want to hone in on if there's a specific story of, a company, an entrepreneur, a community that, really made your heart skip a beat, or you to, take pause in a good way. And, it was just something that really crystallized your belief inside of, technology being used as a meaningful source of impact or change.
I think it was a combination of a different series of life events. There's a couple that are more poignant that come out. Most people would never assume this, but I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and I was actually entirely educated in Newark, New Jersey. Like, I went to a magnet school that started at 7th grade. My elementary school was a preschool that went to 6, and then college, I went to the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Um, and I think why that's reflective and important is that I got to really I had a lot of really interesting juxtapositions within my life growing up. My parents were both in education. They both did very well for themselves in the sense to where, like, they ended up going, for the most part, administratively within their careers. And towards the tail end, my mom ended up going back in classroom prior to retiring. But I guess I say all that to say is, like, education was always considered like kind of a passport to the future.
Mhm.
And with that, I mean that investing in education and being well educated was considered more of a pinnacle and a priority within our household. My degree at NJIT was in computer engineering. I had really been very enamored by jobs. I could have gone into a different degree of positions and professions just based off of how I did, but I chose computer engineering because I thought it would be the most rewarding and also the most challenging. Um, Relevant to kind of like some of those catalytic moments, I had seen like and been surrounded by people like well below the poverty line for almost my entire life, and being juxtaposed to those individuals in real time and seeing how much in common we had. Like, I wouldn't say that we were differentiated in any capacity because, like, truth be told, I think the challenges, and even still within the current political climate, it's a big problem altogether. Most people don't see people as people first. A lot of people have the concept of the other. And we have tendency to have more tribal instincts than not in categorizing what are good people versus bad people on the few differences and where we are not aligned. I think one of the bigger discoveries that came to me, especially as I continued to excel in my career and really built and blossomed friendships with those who are affluent, was that there was virtually very little differences between their behaviors and the behaviors of the friends that I grew up with that were poor. Those stark differences often at times came to circumstances that were well outside of their control. And that's a really hard thing to kind of grasp and come to terms with, because I think the first pillar was acknowledging both the privilege that I had and having access to parents that, in comparison to the income levels of most, were high earners, to parents that valued and appreciated education above all, to being able to enroll myself or even just being born in this country as a starting point. It puts me at a huge advantage in comparison if you're really thinking from a global level with access to opportunities being made available and coming to terms with, granted, I recognize that I worked very hard and I had a lot of grit and dedication that afforded the success and the lifestyle that I have today. But I cannot also ignore the fact that in many ways I was dealt a pretty good hand. And speaking to the situation in particular that was juxtaposing for me, when I first entered the cleaning industry and then started building technology in the space, both I and my co-founders were pretty ignorant and fairly arrogant. Um, we entered the industry under the impression that it was both able-bodied work, meaning that anyone could do it and that anyone with two hands and 2 feet were capable of thriving in it, and that due to the heightened unemployment rate, that it would be more of a field of dreams model. Like, if you build it, there would be an influx of people that wanted to do that type of work. But what the discovery was the psychological components of the industry itself. Like, I usually drive that home this way. If you were to go into a classroom and say, show of hands, who wants to be a house cleaner or a janitor when you grow up? You're probably not going to get too many hands that are raised. And the causality of that, meaning that those who are often in that industry are usually not in that industry by their first, second, or even their third choice. They've gotten into that industry primarily as a means to be able to put food on the table. And sometimes because their options were that limited. And the toll that it takes in being positioned in a place to where you, who are likely 6 times more likely to be in a position of poverty, and considerably more likely to be less educated, facing a ton of different inequities to where it be language barriers, technological illiteracy, in addition to financial barriers as well, or servicing or being of service to people who value their time as paramount because they're often extremely affluent. And so you spend your living surrounding yourself, going door to door to homes that you could never or likely would never afford to live in. And sitting in that and understanding that was frustrating. And I think what made it even more frustrating was the recognition of how likely many of these people that enter these industries are to be exploited because we discovered that just within cleaning and janitorial, businesses are 6 times more likely to fail. Um, and there's like a 95% chance that that type of business will fail in year 1. And it didn't make sense because the cost to get it off the ground was really low, and so there were very limited barrier to entries. And the discovery point was, well, a lot of the technologies that have been created that are well established have not been repurposed and built for people who can utilize them to empower themselves. And to put it even more frankly, I think at points in my career in the earliest factor, one of the questions I would get asked most frequently was, not only why does this technology need to exist, but specifically what is kind of like the moat? What's the impetus? Why has no one built something like this? And the sad reality that was even harder to accept was that the people that have the ability and capability to build products like these are almost never the people that conduct the services on your home. And that really bothered me because as I grew to connect and built relationship as a founder and as my team and co-founders did as well, not only did we see these as people, but we saw these as mothers, as husbands, as fathers. There was a family in particular that I built a phenomenal relationship that were a husband, wife, and son that would clean together, where the husband faced health problems and he used to work as a painter, but after a scare was able to change this position and loved what we did because we were so efficient that they were able to finish their days in like 4 to 5 hours and generating several $100s each day and being well compensated enough to support their family of 3. Like to the point that they actually faced challenges for the first time to where they had to pay a large sum of taxes. And I think that was also another problem. We had really come to realize that there were people that often exploited those that were doing the work itself simply because they lacked the capability to know how to manage it. It's like it was unfair for an entity to thrive and take sometimes as much as 40% of the take rate to send 2 to 3 different people that would then do the job itself. And that we just thought was wrong on all parties. The consumer is now paying a much higher fee to a person that I wouldn't say effectively is operating as a pimp, but like in many ways was leveraging and exploiting the labor capabilities without giving them, and when I say them, the people performing the service, the income that they were entitled to. Not in a sense to where they got the lion's share, but they definitely truly got access to the majority. And so the combination of all of those things is really what principled both myself and my team and founders to really want to ensure that if we were building something, it would be at the greatest benefit to actually making that industry more meritable.
No, I mean, even that the space is extremely interesting, simply because, I mean, even I worked previously within like carpet care restoration, and we've had some discussions about that in the past. But I mean, I was on the opposite end, right? I was the back office guy that was making sure that software was hooked up correctly. I was basically the implementation specialist, and I was running a lot of the operations for making sure everything was running smoothly on that end. But it's interesting hearing the stories of people within the space and how they got there, why they got there, why they stay within those spaces. Because even when I learned about, how much some of our workers were making, I was like, this is ridiculous. And I had brought it up to the owners, to like, I know how much we're bringing in. I know how much these guys are making. What's what's going on here? And but I mean, to certain points, and this is not to diminish any point because I do believe that there are drastic inequalities, but it comes back to us being business owners and entrepreneurs because that was one of the moments where I noticed okay, there are other things the business has to pay for, like,
Mhm.
making sure that these drivers are insured, making sure that, the trucks and the utilities and, the fans and the wands and the brushes and all the things are used, the chemicals, like there are other inherent costs.
There's considerable overhead.
Yes.
There's a
But
considerable degree of overhead that exists, which and, like, also, at the same time, the business owner themselves has to be able to heavily collect a salary.
Mhm.
But I think the disposition between the type of homes, typically, that the owners would hold versus the types of homes that their employees would hold.
It's drastically different.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And I mean, that's even after looking at the numbers, I will humbly or I wholeheartedly agree, especially as businesses go into later stages of maturity where where a lot of those assumptions are coming from and can potentially provide more, where it isn't a quote unquote starting environment, or they're not necessarily, I would consider, startups for some of those businesses, but you're past those initial inflection points where pretty much, as long as you keep on these trajectories, kind of where everything will go and be able to maintain that and can provide more for your workers.
Mhm.
So 100% agree and echo a lot of those sentiments. And to kind of close everything out, not necessarily fully close, we've got a couple more questions, but for the next half of everything, really want to talk about, uh, you know, your mentorship and like some of the insights that you have around that, because you personally work with a lot of organizations like Techstars, Founder Institute, DivInc, as well as, I mean, you've also been on the other side for actually receiving investment and building thriving businesses. um,
Mhm.
so what's something, like, I mean, well, actually, first, what got you into wanting to mentor, entrepreneurs, and what sparked the passion for giving back?
I've always been principled with pay it forward concepts. And then again, it goes back to even what I talked about with my position with influencing the media. I wanted to be the part of the change that I didn't see. I felt that part of the challenges that exist within a lot of the programs to where you get mentors is that the vast majority of the advice that founders receive may not be the best advice for them or their business. And it's not that it didn't come from a well-intentioned individual. Like, a lot of people are not self-aware when they give bad advice. I've given bad advice before, and I definitely can think back on moments to where I have. But I came to the conclusion that a lot of the reason why this happens so frequently is because there's an absence of empathy within the position that the person is in. Meaning, many people that have access to the resources to fund companies have often rarely built one. And that's true for many angel investors, venture capitalists, or like a lot of instances, you may even have the fortune of them having close proximity to where they may have been early employees on unicorns, and thus they have the ability to receive more signal or decipher more signal easier. But in the alarming reality, the vast majority of them have gotten MBAs from 5 different schools and decided to then kind of join and build a fund. And I'm not saying that in a position to be condescending or even be negative, because VC in its own front, it is not easy to raise a fund. It is a challenge. It is a very much a position of really kind of having a network. In many ways, being an entrepreneur is easier because there are ways to show traction within your business outside of getting dollars raised. When you're a manager of a fund, that's the only meritable traction that's shown outside of also showcasing the companies that you've invested in their success, which again is a function of having the dollars to deploy. Um, and I think that absence of empathy as a whole makes it hard. Now, looping back to the conversation of why I continue to invest my time as a mentor, I also represented or recognized that from a representation standpoint, there weren't a lot of mentors that looked like me or came from the same backgrounds as my own. And my wife, who is a phenomenal partner and really not just an incredible support system, but quite frankly, a big pillar in my own personal life and in my career. For her, she taught me early enough something that I never faced, which was for her to believe something was possible, she needed to see it. And it wasn't that she lacked vision, but sometimes it's really easy to create mental prisons on what you can and cannot do based off of your perception of what has been done before. I've never boxed myself in that way. I was fortunate enough to have had parents that invested in making sure that my mind was as free as possible, and in developing the mentality that anything that anyone has done to date, I too could achieve with time and enough resources. But for her, she was like, no, for me, it's difficult for me to see it being possible if I can't see someone that looks like me in the same space, because then it's difficult for me to even want to take the attempt. Even if I'm confident in the direction, I'm concerned with taking the step because I'm uncertain that it will pan out for someone that really resembles me. And so that weighed heavily on me. And I thought that it was imperative that I pay it forward to help the next generation of entrepreneurs the same way that many other entrepreneurs helped invest in me and to get me to my success point as I am now. So that's ultimately the bigger reason why I feel most motivated to help a lot of founders in this space and business owners as a whole.
No, that's perfect. And I know we're getting short on time here, so we're gonna pop into the basically the final half of everything, and then I have one more question after we do this. But I want to basically do a lightning round with you, where we give some quick responses on a couple of questions that I feel like would be really useful for our audience. So let's start this off. So, what's one book you think every entrepreneur, community builder, or professional should read?
Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I think that is probably the first book that anyone in this space should read. I've read it now 5 times. Anytime that I'm starting a new venture, I reread it.
Perfect. And then next question: favorite failure that turned into a blessing.
Favorite failure that turned into a blessing.
I know
I
that one
think
might be a harder one. Yeah.
no, I think well, for starters, I do really appreciate the direction and where we're going. I wouldn't categorize it my favorite because of the pain and the therapy that went to get us to where we are, but I'm very happy with where we are. Um, and I think that the opportunity and the potential that it has upon achieving the success trajectory that we're on is much more massive in comparison to what we used to do. And so I guess in some ways it could have been a blessing in disguise because it's infinitely more scalable and considerably more manageable. But it definitely came with some scar tissue.
Yeah, no, I feel that on a spiritual level. But next one: what's a cold email or DM that you responded to that either changed your trajectory or at least had a memorable impact for you?
Hmm. Cold email that I responded to that changed my trajectory.
Yeah, or at
Uh,
least had a memorable impact. If it didn't necessarily change the directory, just something that
that I sent or received.
uh, why not both or either one? I'm open.
So we were in the market and sourcing for a co-founder after our first co-founder, technical co-founder from New left. And I had done some research and happened to find we were while we were in the market, like I remember one of our mentors had kind of taught me that there's a blessing in a second degree connection. And with that, what she was highlighting was is that, you might find someone that's first degree that's inaccessible, unavailable, but it's often asking the question that if not you, then who? as a follow-up to get an even shorter list, or to follow up and then give them an advance of asking, well, I've already combed through your network. What are your thoughts on this person, this person, this person, this person, to address that parable? And that philosophy is what actually led me to founding Claudius, my co-founder and partner in crime on both New and Spritz. And if it wasn't for that interaction, to where three of the people or two of the people that I had talked to in particular had both had nothing rave things to say about him, me finding him randomly and then hitting him up on like some obscure co-founders like marketplace that was like a sub pocket of LinkedIn targeted for founders, him answering, and then us turning a 45-minute conversation into mini drinks and wings at a happy hour. I don't think that that would have manifested to where we are today. So that was probably the most impactful one that I've sent by far, that I've received. Um, Actually was interesting. I did a lot of pitch competitions, one of which was Pitch Black. Stephen Plug from Portland, Stephen Green, really, really good dude. And he had done it in Seattle, ended up placing second. It was actually the first, prior to, I was they curated and selected us for interview. And my first ever publicized interview was with PBS. And that was really interesting. But fast forward, why I mentioned that one in particular is because after we won, there was someone in the crowd that was like, oh, um, there's this guy in Seattle that really loves marketplaces. And I think he's going to find what you guys are building really interesting. I think if you were comfortable, I'd like to forward the materials to him because I think there's something here. And I was like, yeah, sure. Didn't think much would come from it. But the person that he connected me with was Rudy Gaudry. Rudy, if eventually, after building a year of relationship rapport of going to coffee meetings and giving him aspects on our progress and growth, he was the first outside investor into our company. And we had faced another insurmountable challenge at that point, to where everyone else decided to walk, he decided to stay. And not only did he put his money in, but he put his money in after I won another $50,000 from a different pitch competition, and leveraged his money to be able to build and grow and scale the company to what it then enabled us to get in the Techstars. And so that chain and sequence of like serendipitous events all started from one person seeing me speak publicly and then decided that he wanted to connect me to another person who happened to be one of the most resourced and connected angel investors in the entire Seattle ecosystem.
And for the last rapid fire question, then we'll jump into one final reflection question. But what's one trait that instantly catches your attention when you're at a networking event or when you're, just like outwardly engaging?
Some people would use perseverance. The bigger areas I see signal from is I would kind of correlate it somewhat to grit, but I don't think that's it. I have this innate ability to kind of get a sense, having seen it enough, how passionate someone is for the problem that they're solving, and how in their speed of growth. I can kind of almost project and notice, especially not just first conversation, but follow up and their speed of follow up. How quickly that they're responding on emails is highly indicative. How quickly they are to like follow up and navigate follow ups is really interesting. That level of persistence, that hunger, that ambition, that more than anything is where I would say like I've seen the difference in terms of success trajectory versus those that fail to be able to grow. Like you have to want it, and you can really get a sense for those who do versus those who aren't necessarily doing this for their hobby, but their heart's not in it. And they're just thinking that this is the right move versus this isn't what they want or need to exist above all.
And then jumping into the question that we ask on every single session, granted in different variations depending on who we're talking with, but what's one thing that you wish every business leader knew about, but they often don't?
What is one thing that I wish every business leader knew about but doesn't often? There's a lot to unpack there.
Right.
I think it's mainly because I'm thinking about what I think of myself and putting myself in those shoes, and I always put a parallel of if I was in the same position just starting off, what would have wished someone would have told me outside of the things I've already shared on this call in terms of like it's treat it like a marathon, not a sprint, and pace yourself appropriately, be kind and graceful to yourself, disconnect yourself from the identity of the brand, make sure that those two coexist, but as independent entities and not as codependent entities. Be kind to yourself, be kind to your team, realize that they're human beings as well. I think maybe the other component okay, this is actually one that I didn't mention that I think it's unique and I think it's powerful to accept as well. Comparison is the thief of joy. I think that there are instances to where sometimes founders will inappropriately compare their circumstances with the circumstances of others, and either it will breed resentment, anger, frustration, or disappointment in their current position. And those types of emotions have space, but they should not have space within your company. And I think it's more important for founders to focus on, and their teams collectively, to be more intentioned on where they are and where they want to be than trying to compare where others are, unless it's directly impactful for the actions that they take, or there's some form of competitive element. It very rarely does good. And similarly, in that same vein, someone else's success is not your shame or vice versa. Just because someone else is doing well does not mean that you're doing poorly. And just because you're doing well doesn't mean that they're doing poorly. You guys are each on independent, concurrent journeys and at different phases. And life is a bit of a roller coaster. So please make sure that you're kind and compassionate to those within your sphere of influence, because you don't know what they're going through, let alone to where you would like the same treatment to happen and come back to you if you were ever in the similar position to where you now are down and they're up.
No, that's a perfect sentiment to end on. I actually did a post about that a couple of weeks ago, very recently, because I realized that I was falling into that exact same mindset at certain points, even last year. And I think maybe we'd even talked about some of that stuff at a certain point too.
Mhm.
And so basically outwardly talking about like avoiding that, because after you take those chips off of your shoulder, the growth is really limitless or endless for a lot of things too. And then you start to realize how many things were weighing you down just because you're spending a lot of time comparing versus just running your own race, right?
Mhm.
But how can people connect with you?
Easiest way to get a hold of me, my LinkedIn. If you send me a LinkedIn message, please send me a LinkedIn message explaining how you know who I am. I very rarely, if not ever, connect with people that I don't know. That doesn't mean that I won't, but I need to know exactly how I can connect with you or how I can be of help with some context in the message. Outside of that, you can get a hold of me on my website, my first and last name, or go to Kwame.ceo, www.kwame.ceo, and it's another way to learn a little bit more about what I'm working on, what I'm building as well.
Perfect. And then obviously want to highlight the company. If you want to give a brief 1 to 2 sentence again so everybody remembers what you guys are building at Spritz.
Yeah, so Spritz is a back office business in a box for home service professionals. Our primary or evangelist customer segment is house cleaners. In addition to the nearly 4,000 house cleaners that we have signed up to get access to our platform, we built a simple marketplace called HireCleaner.pro that's being powered by our technology. If you visit the website and need your home cleaned, you can get a quote in less than a minute. And opt to move forward and get one of the service professionals to clean your home.
Perfect. And no, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it, man. This has been an amazing conversation as always. Good to actually have you, I guess, in the formal environment. I know we've had a lot of interesting one-on-ones, and you're one of the people that honestly is able to articulate my business better than I can and everything else. So it's always great to be able to learn from you and learn about you. It's truly a blessing to be able to have had you on today. And going into the closing on us. So I am Gabriel Rucker and I'm the CEO of Founding Titans or used to be Founding Titans, now Titen AI. See, it's just flows so naturally. But so we've rebranded to Titen AI, and essentially our platform is built to be able to help professionals, communities, and organizations to be able to 10x their network size and engagement. And so essentially how we're doing that is being able to find the right people, businesses, communities, events, and resources for our users, as well as community management, event management, sponsorship management, which a lot of platforms don't have and we're building out. So I know a lot of community builders specifically have requested that, and that's a feature that's coming. But in the spirit of the rebrand and everything else, we are launching the 100 Challenge. Our goal over the next 30 days is to get 100 communities and organizations to sign up for the platform. And we're also offering a specific discount for $100 a month for those first 100 customers on our enterprise tier. You don't have to sign up for enterprise, but if you want to, we make sure that we were able to really incentivize people to come on during this time. And so, yeah, definitely go ahead to our new website, Titen.ai. If you do go to foundingtitans.com, it's just going to redirect you to the new one. So we got all that stuff fixed up. So definitely connect with us there. We also have a lot of events that we have coming up. So if you're in Austin, Texas, on September 11th, we have an event with what is basically founders and investors to kick off fundraising season. So make sure that you are, jumping into, meet with me, the team, a lot of investors, a lot of amazing founders. Kwame is signed up for it already. So definitely want to make sure that people are able to go to that. We also have a global networking session on the same day as well. So if you guys want to get some networking done beforehand, or you don't live in Austin, you can find all of these events and more on our calendar that's shown on the screen here. And on Tuesday, we are having a call specifically about the global state of investment. So if you are an investor or an entrepreneur or just startup curious, then definitely jump on for that. Thank you all for tuning in or watching after the fact, because these recordings are available on LinkedIn, YouTube, and we're working on getting them spread across some additional platforms. But thank you so much, Kwame, and we're going to leave you off with the video announcing the 100 Challenge. So here we go.
I'm Gabriel Rucker, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Titen AI, a platform that helps professionals, communities, and organizations 10x their engagement and network size. For too long, communities and enterprises have been stuck with legacy systems that feel more like glorified messaging boards than truly engaging environments. These platforms care more about algorithms than outcomes, and they've made networking more transactional, less about relationships, more about noise. Even with AI making content creation easier, it's actually become harder to engage with the right people. That's why we built Titen AI, powered by Aria, your artificial relationship intelligence assistant. Aria doesn't just tell you who to engage with, but how and why. No more guessing about relevance, no more scrolling through endless directories with minimal context. By matching you with the right people, businesses, communities, events, and resources, Aria delivers actionable insights and warm introductions that spark real collaboration. At its core, the Titen AI system hosts 4 powerful engines: professional relationship management, community management, event management, and sponsorship management. Today, I'm excited to introduce the 100 Challenge. Over the next 30 days, we're bringing on our next 100 pilot communities and organizations. To make it more impactful, we're offering 50% off for our enterprise tier. That's $100 per month for the first year for our early adopters. If you're a part of a community that needs engagement or an organization that's struggling with collaboration, send them our way. We're here to help. Head to Titen AI to book your demo and join the challenge today.
You're muted.
Haha. Thank you all for joining in, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you.